How's it going, everyone? As you may already know, I'm Crysis and I like movies. If you're just joining me with this video, welcome! I've already seen 101 movies through the month of June, and July just kept adding to that total, including the first new streaming movie of the year. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting off the month, about a week late, was the first of three screen unseens for July, in a weird rom dramedy called Oh Hi, starring Logan Lerman and Molly Gordon, and it was odd. This movie falls into the unfortunate trap of trying to be too many genres at once. It wants to be a movie about romance, but it also wants to be a drama, thriller, and a comedy all at once, but it never hits the mark on any of them, save for the comedy. The story itself was, well, strange, but that's to be expected just when looking at the short description on either IMDb or the theater website or just from watching the trailer. Everything goes off the rails rather quickly, but when it attempts to get back on them, it does so in such a haphazard way that it just falls right back off, leading to an insanely messy ending that seems to resolve everything with a good feels moment, but everything is still extremely messed up to the point where several people would need to go to jail for the events of the movie. It was all just too much, honestly, which is strange considering it's only an hour and a half. While overall a decent movie, it just left a lot to be desired, so it's gonna get a 6.5 out of 10. Up next was the first new streaming movie of the year, and one that has taken the internet and world by storm, even if I did get to it about 3 weeks after its release. K-Pop Demon Hunters from Netflix. Now, I did put this one off for a while because I wasn't sure I would like it, but when the music, the story, and the animation all slap as hard as this, it's hard not to like it. From the relationship between the Huntrix girls to their feud with the Saja boys to the humor found in both of these situations, it was just a fantastic movie from start to finish. Plus, that dumbass cat was just too damn funny to not be mentioned here. Love that little shit. Easily one of the best movies that I have seen this year, and Sony Animation has developed and released another banger. I just wish this had had the chance to hit the big screen instead of being stuck on Netflix, because I think more people should have the chance to see this, even if it wouldn't necessarily have done as good in theaters. Also, I definitely wasn't listening to Golden as I was writing the initial review for this. It gets an easy 11 out of 10, making that number 5 on the year. Following that up was another feel-good movie, though in a massively different way. Superman, starring David Corenswet, Rachel Brosnahan, and Nicholas Hoult. First off, it was nice to see a Superman movie where he was a symbol of hope for people around the world and not just kinda there like he was in Man of Steel. Everything worked well in this movie, and even with the bloated cast of characters, it never actually felt bloated at all. Crypto stole the show for me, honestly, and despite what Superman says throughout the movie, he is a very good boy. Nicholas Hoult was a fantastic choice as Lex Luthor, bringing a truly sinister vibe to every scene he was in, even in some of the more calm ones. David Cornsweet was a similarly fantastic choice to play the Man of Steel, Big Blue, Mr. Man himself, Clark Kent. Something about his realistic optimism in humanity and lighthearted worldview was so refreshing to see in a world where superhero movies are tackling increasingly dark and depressing topics. It was just a refreshing movie in so many ways. My only gripe would be some strange looking CGI, mostly when it was close-ups when Superman was flying, but those were few and far between, so it wasn't that much of a detraction from the movie itself. Easily one of my favorite superhero projects in the past few years, and an easy 9 out of 10. Following Peak was a movie whose name I jokingly changed. Skillhouse, though I was calling it Shithouse by the end of it. And just, I get the idea behind the movie, but it's so damn stupid. The story is dumb, the inclusion of 50 Cent is dumb, just everything in this movie is so dumb. I knew it wasn't going to be good going into it, but I wasn't expecting it to be this dog shit. I don't like to rag on movies too much if I can, but I just cannot find any redeeming qualities about the hour and a half that I just wasted watching it. As with a few other movies I've seen this year, it's hard to care about any characters in a movie when A, the characters are just shitty people to begin with, and B, the actors playing the characters just cannot act. When characters start dying, I just don't care, and the ending, with everything that had led up to that moment, just lost me. I checked out about halfway through though, and I wish I had left because at least then I could have done something productive instead of watching Neil McDonough telling one of the characters he would, and I, probably misquote, skullfuck her sister with one of her ribs. Actually, scratch that. That was probably the only good part about this movie. Other than that, pure shit. 1.5 solely because of that Neil McDonough quote, and we are moving on. Driving 20 minutes through a potential thunderstorm to see a movie isn't necessarily ideal, but it's what I had to do for the next movie, Sovereign, starring Nick Offerman and Dennis Quaid. This movie is a great example of a story that is inspired by true events, taking bits and pieces from various stories and viral videos of so-called sovereign citizens while not directly being based on any singular story. It was a mildly difficult watch, if only because of how it was marketed. I was expecting a high-octane thriller with twists around every corner, when what I got was a slow, methodical drama showing the slow descent into madness caused by Nick Offerman's character. Speaking of, Offerman did absolutely fantastic in this role, and I hope to see him in more villain or antagonistic roles in the future. On the other hand, I don't know if Jacob Tremblay was the right pick for the role of the son, though it may just be that his character arc through the story goes nowhere. This movie did a great job in showing how insane the ideology of sovereign citizens actually is, and how, in the most extreme of cases, it can lead to lives lost because of pure stupidity. It could have been slightly faster paced though, but that's just a personal opinion. Everything considered, it was good, but it could have been better. So it'll get a 7.5 out of 10. I decided to take the next few days to get caught up on movies, which ended up being a stretch of 7 movies in 6 days. Starting off that stretch was the stupidest name for a movie I've heard in a while, and the movie it's attached to was just as stupid, but was still enjoyable. Guns and Moses, starring Mark Feuerstein and Neil McDonough. I honestly don't know what all to say about this because it was just a wild movie from start to finish. Unfortunately, due to how many movies I've seen, I was able to guess the ending about a third of the way through, but it was still enjoyable seeing how they could get to the ending that they did. Mark Feuerstein and Neil McDonough were great in their roles as Rabbi Mo and the mayor respectively, with the mayor being a great friend throughout the whole runtime. This is going to sound strange, but it was a treat seeing Christopher Lloyd as a Holocaust survivor dressing down a kid who had bought into the whole "the Holocaust didn't happen" bullshit. Overall, a fun, if extremely goofy movie, but not that goofy movie, and one I'm weirdly glad that I saw, so it'll get a 6.5. Next up was the first doubleheader of July, and I gotta say, there honestly needs to be a moratorium on making movies based on old IP because the next movie, Smurfs, was just plain bad. So please, if anyone in Hollywood is actually listening, please let this franchise just smurfing die. The story was honestly nonsensical, the acting was corny and phoned in, and the whole thing just felt off, even from a kids' movie perspective. Plus, they tried to make it a musical, but they only had, 4 musical numbers throughout the whole thing, so even that felt half smurfed. The worst thing about this one, though, isn't just that the story was bad, the acting was bad, and even the music was kind of bad. It's that it was just plain boring. Nothing really happened up until the last 10 or 15 minutes, but by that point, I was just waiting for it to be over with so I could get back to my apartment. An hour and a half of my life that I'm not getting back, unfortunately, and this smurfing disaster is getting a 2 out of 10. The second movie of that doubleheader was another movie based on an old IP, though not as old as the Smurfs, this one being I Know What You Did Last Summer, starring a whole host of new people. Overall, I think this was a fine installment of the series, but one that is better ended about 5 to 10 minutes earlier than what the runtime shows. Another project this year where I wholeheartedly disagree with the ending, the other being Ironheart, despite only having watched the first two movies a few weeks prior. The rest of the movie was your typical slasher flick, trying to figure out who it is, and the movie does a great job in keeping you guessing right up until the final reveal, but after that, it just goes right off the deep end of shocking twist just for the sake of having a shocking twist. It's not satisfying, it's not good, and it just doesn't sit right with me. Overall, it was a decent movie, but the ending just kills the enjoyment of the rest of the movie for me. What could have been an easy 7 or 8 instead falls to a 6 out of 10. Following up that horror movie was the next Screen Unseen, this time a Scream Unseen, showing a horror movie called The Home, starring Pete Davidson. This movie was just so weird to me. On the one hand, Pete Davidson gives a performance in a role that he was mildly typecast for, but also cast against type, if that makes sense. On the other hand, though, it's a movie that's very light on the actual story, so they just threw something at the wall for the ending to see what stuck, and it just kinda didn't. The suspense that the film tries to build does work from time to time, but I found my attention falling away from the movie here and there, wondering when X or Y thing would happen, or if I could do A, B, or C thing when I got back to my apartment after the movie. This movie was just kinda there, but I'm still kinda glad I saw it. Only slightly better than mid, if only because of the ending, so it'll get a 5.5 out of 10. The next day, tied for longest title of the month, was Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight, and much like the 7-year-old protagonist, I had no idea what was going on for most of this movie, which also, much like Hot Milk earlier this year, gives no indication as to why it's called what it is. While it is an interesting view into the life of a family in the short-lived Zimbabwe Rhodesia, it's so disjointed that it was hard to follow. It seemed to drag in certain places, but then something major would happen for seemingly no reason, just to make sure the audience's attention was still on the movie. Negatives aside, though, the actress playing Bobo, the young protag, Lexi Venter, did a fantastic job in her role, being both mature enough to not go entirely off the rails like some child actors are wont to do, but still managing to show the childlike wonder and worry of being young in such a turbulent time. Overall, this movie had potential, but most of it was squandered in the disjointed storytelling, so it'll get a 4.5. Second to last in the long stretch of movies is Ari Aster's latest in Strange Movies, this time a 2.5-hour bad trip in Eddington, starring Joaquin Phoenix and Pedro Pascal. Now, from the first trailer of this movie, I was unsure of exactly how it would function as a movie in and of itself. For starters, it's a neo-Western movie set in May of 2020, the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and a lot of the talking points that they bring up in the movie just come across as someone trying to poorly make fun of both the left and right sides of the aisle during that time. Overall, it was decent though, up until the last hour of the movie when shit really starts to hit the fan. But then it turns into a weird psychological drama with some very strange twists and turns that make absolutely no sense given everything that had happened up to that point. It was just very, very strange, and it ended about 10 minutes after it should have. It also felt like a movie that was made way too soon after the events that it's trying to depict. Overall, it was just messy and dragged on for way too long, and the only saving grace was the acting, so it'll get a 5 out of 10. Following up the 2.5 hours of mid, I brought a couple of friends to watch the newest Marvel flick, The Fantastic Four: First Steps. And can I just say, we are so fucking back. This movie was great because it's the first MCU project since I think the first Iron Man movie in 2008 where you can watch it without having seen any other Marvel projects before it and know exactly what is going on. Simply put, it was fantastic. For real though, nearly everything about the movie was amazing, from the story to the cast to the world it's set in. The whole of the Fantastic Four were perfectly cast, especially Ebon Moss-Bachrach as Ben Grimm and Joseph Quinn as Johnny Storm. The only thing that I had a problem with was the Thing's CGI. Most of the scenes that he was in were solo shots of him with dialogue happening around him because it just looked unnatural when there were close-up shots of him next to other people. Other than that, though, it was great. Or, as I said earlier, fantastic. And for that, it's getting an easy 9 out of 10. The final screen unseen of the month started off yet another doubleheader and was easily guessed, given the rating, which means I saw Sketch, a weirdly wholesome movie about a kid whose drawings come to life. And while definitely more of a horror movie for kids than an adventure flick, this movie still held its own as a fun romp through ways of dealing with grief and everything that comes from that. Tony Hale does a great job as the dad in this movie, with the kids being able to step up and hold their own in what could have very easily been a phoned-in, no shits given kind of role. There were a few points that were too over the top, even for this style of movie, but overall it worked really well. If you've lost anyone close to you, unironically, watch Sketch. It says a lot despite being a goofy movie about drawings coming to life, and it'll get a 7 out of 10 for its efforts. Immediately following that up was the latest in social media influencer movies, this one a found footage horror flick, House on Eden, starring Chris Collins and Selena Myers as themselves. Now, I can definitely see the intent with this movie, and it was honestly pretty decent for the most part, but it felt extremely rushed, despite taking nearly half the runtime to get to the titular house. Though, I suppose, with the runtime of only 77 minutes, that will happen to you. On the one hand, the characters felt like actual people, and I think that's because they were just the actors playing themselves, so they didn't have to get into any other characters' mindsets other than their own. On the other hand, the conflict felt extremely forced and could have been solved via literally any kind of communication between any of the three main characters. It was hard to watch at times, though that was mostly due to the near motion sickness brought on by the found footage nature of the movie, but those moments were very few and far between. Overall, it was a pretty decent, if mildly forgettable, found footage horror movie, and I think we need more of those, so it'll get a spooky 6 out of 10. Another doubleheader the next day started off with another horror movie, and it wasn't just the story that was scary, it was the production itself. Ick, starring Brandon Routh. Now, bear with me here because this is going to sound very strange, but Ick felt like a Fairly Odd Parents episode that got turned into a full-length, live-action horror movie. The story felt bad from the get-go. The CGI of the titular Ick was hit or miss, though mostly misses, and it overused a bad joke throughout the whole runtime. And while I get what they were going for with the soundtrack, the early aughts punk rock just did not fit the vibe of the rest of the movie. It also felt like a strange parody of COVID stuff while also referencing COVID stuff, which made no sense and came across as tasteless. There was also a bunch of characters that were parodies of idiots on both political sides, which also came across as tasteless and just did not work. The only decent thing was the acting, but that wasn't really enough to save this train wreck, so it'll get its own ick at a 2 out of 10. The second movie of that doubleheader was Together, starring Dave Franco and Alison Brie, and it was leagues better than the movie before it, though that wasn't really a high bar to be fair. While this was overall a very good movie that I enjoyed watching, it did struggle in finding what it wanted to be. It was a pretty successful body horror movie, but it never went far enough until the very end. It wanted to be a romantic drama movie, but it never actually focused on the relationship aspect of it, mostly focusing on the horror going on around them. It was just very confusing to watch for those reasons. On the other hand, the body horror that we got was fantastic, even if most of it was shown in the trailers. The acting from Alison Brie and Dave Franco was amazing, showing the trepidation and terror that would realistically come with the events of the movie. I will say that I kind of disagree with the ending, though for a different reason than I Know What You Did Last Summer, though I won't say why for spoiler reasons. Overall, it was a very good movie, even if it suffered from an identity crisis for the majority of the runtime. Because of everything here, it'll come together at an 8.5. The final movie of this stretch led me to see A24's Sorry Baby, starring and directed by Ava Victor. Easy to say that this movie is going to join the ranks of Warfare and a few other movies where I'm glad to have seen it, but man, you would have to pay me a lot of money to watch it again. It was a tough watch for all the best reasons, least of all the material being discussed throughout the runtime. The acting was subdued but poignant, the story itself was heartbreaking and painful to watch, and it was altogether very well done. The only thing I have a problem with is the disjointed storytelling. There are very few cases where it works, but with this movie, I think it did a good enough job of helping us understand what was happening and when in the timeline it was. Also, I think this is the first drama movie I've seen where the main friendship between the main character and her best friend isn't toxic and is just a purely wholesome friendship. Also, and this may just be bias here, but the sandwich guy is by far my favorite character because he's just a dude. An extremely helpful dude who gives Agnes a sandwich, and apparently it's a pretty good one. An easy 10 out of 10 and a great way to end the month of July. In the month of July, I saw a total of 17 movies for an average rating of 6.3. I walked into 3 of those movies, not knowing what I was seeing, those being Oh Hi, The Home, and Sketch. I had to pay for 7 movies this month, though 2 of them were Fathom events, so they wouldn't benefit from my Stubbs membership, so I spent a total of $61.47, which is half of what I saved in tickets, being $120.12. To briefly recap the quality of movies I saw in order from top to bottom, according to me, we had K-Pop Demon Hunters at 11, Sorry Baby at 10, Superman and Fantastic Four tied at 9, Together at 8.5, Sovereign at 7.5, Sketch at 7, Oh Hi and Guns N' Moses tied at 6.5, I Know What You Did Last Summer and House on Eden tied at 6, The Home at 5.5, Eddington at 5, Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight at 4.5, Smurfs and Ick tied at 2, and last and certainly least, Skillhouse at 1.5. As always, if you see a movie you want a full review on, feel free to ask, and I'll try to get it made in between seeing everything I want to see, making these videos, and other life stuff that happens. July was a lot, but fewer movies than I expected if I'm being honest. I hope you all enjoyed this, and hopefully it won't take me nearly as long to get through August's video, though if everything holds, and it did, I'll have seen 26 movies by the end of the month, so it'll be a long one. May even have to split that video in 2, but we'll see. With all that said, I do hope you take me up on some of these recommendations, at least the good ones, and see some of the stuff that I saw. Although, if you're like one of my coworkers, I'm sure you would enjoy the shit movies as well. Even if you don't, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and of course, happy viewing.